For years, the signs were right in front of us. Experts warned. Data screamed. Quiet voices begged to be heard. But we scrolled past, changed the channel, told ourselves everything is fine. It wasn't. This crisis didn't appear overnight. It grew slowly like a crack in a wall no one wanted to fix. Small failures were called temporary. Early warnings were labeled overreactions, and uncomfortable truths were buried under comfort and routine. Because facing the problem meant changing habits, and change is hard. Then one day, the crack became a collapse. People felt confused, overwhelmed, betrayed. They asked, how did this happen? The truth was painful. It didn't suddenly happen. We just didn't listen when it was still preventable. Fear, denial, and short-term thinking kept us silent until silence became costly. Here's the turning point most people miss. A crisis is not only a failure, it's a message. A message telling us to slow down, to pay attention, to listen before it's too late again. Real solutions begin when we value long-term wisdom over short-term comfort. When we choose responsibility over convenience, and when we finally listen to the voices we once ignored. Every crisis teaches the same lesson. The future whispers before it screams. If we learn to listen early, we don't have to learn the hard way. The question isn't who's to blame. The real question is, will we listen next time? Because the next warning is already here. Listen carefully. This crisis isn't just one event. It's not a single disaster, headline, or breaking news alert. It's a slow-burning breakdown of systems we trusted, of choices we postponed, of warnings we kept pushing into later. It shows up as stress that never leaves, as uncertainty about the future, as people working harder but feeling safer less. This crisis is the result of years of ignoring small signals, rising pressure, fragile systems, and growing imbalance, until the weight became too heavy to carry. And the most dangerous part, for a long time, it felt normal. That's how crises hide. The warnings weren't hidden. They weren't mysterious or complex. They were spoken in reports, written in data, whispered by people who saw the future coming before the rest of us did. But the problem wasn't lack of information. The problem was comfort. Listening meant accepting change. Ignoring meant life could stay the same, at least for a while. So we delayed. We debated. We told ourselves there was still time. When someone raised concern, they were called negative. When patterns appeared, they were dismissed as coincidence. Deep down, many people felt something was wrong. But fear of disruption was stronger than the courage to act. And slowly, warning signs turned into background noise until the noise became impossible to ignore. Here's the truth. Warnings are not meant to scare us. They are meant to protect us. Real change begins when we stop waiting for certainty and start responding to responsibility. Progress doesn't require knowing everything. It requires acting before damage becomes irreversible. The moment we listen is the moment we regain control. History doesn't punish ignorance, it punishes delay. The warnings were clear not to shame us, but to prepare us. If we learn to listen early, we can turn foresight into strength. Because the future doesn't fail us, we fail the future when we refuse to listen. So why, if the warnings were so clear, did no one listen? Because the truth was inconvenient. It challenged routines, profits, beliefs, and comfort zones. Listening meant admitting we might be wrong. And for many people, that felt more dangerous than staying silent. Denial is quiet. It sounds like not now. Someone else will handle it. We've survived worse. People didn't ignore the warnings out of cruelty, they ignored them out of fear. Fear of change, fear of loss. Fear of being the first to act and the first to fail. And while everyone waited, the problem kept growing. Understanding this changes everything. The opposite of denial isn't panic, it's awareness. When we accept that discomfort is part of growth, we stop running from hard truths and start facing them together. Listening becomes an act of courage, not weakness. No one listened, because listening requires bravery. Bravery to question the familiar. Bravery to act before certainty arrives. But here's the hope. The moment we choose awareness over comfort, the cycle breaks. And when even one person starts listening, the future begins to change. Every long-ignored crisis reaches a moment it can no longer be hidden. The systems that once held everything together begin to fail. The excuses stop working. And the question shifts from, is this real? To what do we do now? This is the turning point, not because the crisis appeared, but because denial finally disappeared. This moment is uncomfortable. People feel regret for not acting sooner, fear about what comes next, anger about who should have listened. It feels overwhelming, like the damage is already done. But this is where most people forget one thing. Awareness often arrives after pain. The turning point isn't about fixing everything at once. It's about choosing not to look away anymore. It's when conversations become honest, when responsibility replaces blame, and small actions begin to matter again. This is where rebuilding starts, not with perfection, but with participation. The turning point is not the end of the story. It's the moment the story becomes intentional. Crises don't define us. Our response does. And when we finally face reality together, even the darkest moment can become the beginning of a wiser future. It's easy to think crises happen out there, in governments, systems, or distant places. But this one quietly reaches you, in rising stress, in uncertainty about tomorrow, in the feeling that working harder doesn't always mean moving forward. Even if you didn't cause it, you feel the weight of it, and that weight creates exhaustion. You try to stay focused, but distractions multiply. You plan ahead, but the future feels unclear. You do everything right, yet stability feels fragile. This is where many people feel powerless, like their actions don't matter in something this big. But here's what rarely gets said. Big crises change direction through small, consistent choices. When you stay informed instead of distracted, when you adapt instead of freeze, when you take responsibility for what you can control, your skills, mindset, and daily decisions, that's how influence begins. This crisis doesn't just test systems, it tests individuals. You're not powerless if your awareness is strength. Your choices are signals. When enough people choose clarity over comfort, the future starts shifting one person at a time. The biggest mistake we make during a crisis is believing it came out of nowhere. When we think that way, we miss the lesson and risk repeating the same story again. Because without reflection, recovery is temporary. Looking back is uncomfortable. It forces us to admit what we ignored, the moments we delayed, the voices we dismissed. It's easier to move on quickly than to pause and ask, what did this try to teach us? But avoiding the lesson only guarantees another crisis. The big lesson is simple, but powerful. Pay attention early. Small signals matter. Quiet warnings matter. Uncomfortable truths matter. When we build the habit of listening to data, to people, to reality, we turn awareness into prevention. Every crisis is a teacher. But only if we're willing to learn. We listen sooner, act wiser, and choose long-term thinking over short-term comfort. Then this crisis won't be remembered for the damage it caused, but for the wisdom it left behind. If you want clear, simple explanations of global issues without panic or noise, subscribe to this channel. Can't comment below. Do you think the world reacts too late to big problems? Because understanding is the first step toward change.